Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Yeah.
This one is a little different.
Yeah, this was pretty cool.
Yeah, we're going back in time.
Back to the 80s.
Yeah, to 1985.
Big hair.
Well, yeah, leg warmers,
Synthesizer.
all that good stuff. But we're not diving into the fashion trends of the 80s.
Oh, no, we're
We're
not.
looking at a movie that came out that year.
A movie that, in a lot of ways, predicted the environmental awareness that we have now.
Yeah, like it was ahead of its time. The movie is called Emerald Forest.
Yeah, you seen it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Classic. And for this deep dive, we're using an episode of the Retro Rewind podcast.
A great podcast.
Yeah, they do a good job of putting these older films into context. The episode is called
Emerald Forest, A Green Vision of 1985.
Catchy title. So 1985, right. Think about what was big at the box office that year.
Oh, man. Back to the Future.
Totally.
Rambo.
Yeah, tons of action movies.
Big explosions.
It was all about escapism, you know?
Yeah, totally.
And then in the middle of all that, you get Emerald Forest. This film that takes you deep into the Amazon rainforest.
And it's not just about the scenery, right?
No, it's about a tribe living there.
And the way they live is totally different from what most people would imagine.
It's like a whole other world.
Yeah. You might think, okay, here we go. Another one of those noble savage stories, right?
Where the indigenous people are portrayed as simple or childlike.
Exactly. But Emerald Forest flips that whole idea on its head.
It challenges those stereotypes.
The plot revolves around an engineer's son.
Who gets kidnapped by this indigenous tribe.
And at first you think, oh no, he needs to be rescued, right?
But the film shows us that the tribe are actually the ones protecting the rainforest.
They're not the savages, they're the caretakers.
They understand the rainforest in a way that the outsiders don't.
And they live in harmony with it.
Exactly. They're not just exploiting it for resources. They see themselves as part of the ecosystem,
It's like they're living with the forest.
not just in it.
Yeah, and visually, the film really emphasizes this connection.
Oh, the visuals are stunning
John Borman, the director, he insisted on filming on location.
in the Amazon.
Yeah, which back then was a massive undertaking.
No CGI back then.
Nope, all real. And you can tell, the cinematography is breathtaking.
You get these sweeping shots of the rainforest, the light filtering through the canopy.
The colors are incredible.
It really draws you into that world.
You feel like you're right there with the characters. Okay, but here's the thing, right?
Okay.
This movie came out in the 80s, when audiences were used to, explosions and car chases.
Yeah, fast-paced action.
So how did people react to this movie about a rainforest?
Well, you'd think it would have flopped, right?
Totally.
Too slow, too weird.
But it didn't. It actually got pretty good reviews.
The critics praised the visuals and the story,
And it even won a BAFTA award for cinematography.
which is a big deal.
Huge deal. But it's true, it didn't make a ton of money.
Not compared to, Back to the Future.
Right, maybe it was just too, cerebral for the average moviegoer at the time.
Too much thinking, not enough action.
Yeah, maybe. Think about it. Back to the Future was pure fun and escapism, right?
Right.
But Emerald Forest was making you think about things like colonialism and deforestation.
Yeah, pretty heavy stuff for a Friday night at the movies.
Exactly. And speaking of colonialism,
Right.
we can't talk about Emerald Forest without talking about the historical context.
The impact of colonialism on the Amazon.
Exactly. For centuries, European powers had been exploiting the Amazon rainforest.
Taking its resources, displacing indigenous populations.
And Emerald Forest brought those wounds to the forefront.
Even though it was a fictional story, it was grounded in a very real history of exploitation.
And it didn't shy away from the ugly truth about deforestation either.
No, it showed the burning of trees, the displacement of communities.
It was a wake-up call, especially for audiences who were used to seeing the rainforest as just this exotic backdrop for adventure stories.
Right. It forced them to confront the reality of what was happening.
So you've got this clash between a classic coming-of-age story, right?
With the engineer's son being abducted.
Yeah, and this much bigger issue of environmentalism.
Two narratives intertwined.
Exactly. So the son is taken by the tribe, but then what?
That's where the film gets really interesting. The boy, Tommy, starts to adapt to the tribe's way of life.
He learns their language, their customs, their connection to nature.
He undergoes a transformation.
Yeah, and the film flips the savage stereotype completely.
It's the outsiders, the people encroaching on the rainforest who are portrayed as the uncivilized ones.
The ones who are out of balance with nature.
Exactly. So Tommy isn't being rescued from the tribe,
He's being rescued by them.
from the destructive forces of the modern world.
Wow, what a role reversal. It's like he's escaping from the world that's destroying the planet.
He's finding a new way of being, a more sustainable way of life.
And that's a pretty radical message for a mainstream film in the 80s.
It challenged the dominant narrative of progress and development.
It made people question their own values, their own way of life.
It made them think about what it truly means to be civilized.
It makes you wonder, did audiences back then really get it?
Did they grasp the deeper meaning of the film?
Or were they just caught up in the adventure aspect?
That's a good question. It's hard to know for sure.
But even if they didn't fully understand the environmental and cultural messages back then,
The film planted a seed.
it introduced them to a different way of thinking, a different way of relating to the natural world.
And that's powerful.
And you know what's really interesting?
Huh.
This whole movie, it wasn't just made up.
It wasn't.
No, John Boorman, the director, he was inspired by real events.
Real indigenous tribes in the Amazon.
Yeah. He took stories of their struggles, their wisdom, their connection to the rainforest.
And he wove them into this fictional narrative.
Exactly. So we're not just talking about a made-up adventure here.
There's a real-life element to this that makes it even more impactful.
So much more. Hold on, you're telling me there's more to this story?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot more to unpack.
We're not just talking about some fictional adventure. There's a real-life connection.
Absolutely. This film is rooted in reality.
I need to hear more about this. Tell me everything.
Well, we need to take a closer look at how Boorman used real events to shape the film's narrative.
All right, let's dive in.
So Emerald Forest isn't just some fantastical story made up out of thin air.
Mm-hmm.
John Boorman, the director, he was really moved by these stories he heard about indigenous communities in the Amazon.
The ones facing threats from development and all that.
Exactly. He was so troubled by these stories that he wanted to bring these issues to light, to a wider audience.
So he used a fictional story to do that.
Yeah. He took those real-life struggles and, wove them into a narrative that would get people thinking about these things.
That makes the film even more powerful, knowing that it's grounded in, actual events. It's not just entertainment.
A call to action.
Exactly. And this whole blend of fiction and reality brings up an interesting point about, how we see indigenous cultures. Emerald Forest, even though it's fictionalized, it challenged those typical portrayals you often see in Hollywood.
You mean the whole noble savage thing?
Yeah.
That romanticized image that makes indigenous people seem simple or, childlike.
Right. Oversimplifies them.
Exactly. And it doesn't give them agency, It doesn't show them as complex human beings.
So Emerald Forest was trying to do something different.
It wanted to portray the tribe as wise and resourceful, sure, but also as, fully realized people with their own flaws and conflicts.
So the film was trying to humanize them.
To show them as individuals, not just some stereotype.
Right. But did it succeed? I mean, there's always that risk of misrepresenting another culture, even with good intentions.
That's a really good point. And it's a complex issue. There's been a lot of debate over the years about whether Emerald Forest totally avoided that, falling into the trap of cultural appropriation.
Some critics have said that the film maybe exaggerated or sensationalized some of the tribe's rituals and beliefs.
For dramatic effect.
Yeah, so maybe it wasn't a perfect representation.
Maybe not.
But it was a step in the right direction, especially for its time.
I think that's fair. Remember, this was the 80s. Our understanding of cultural sensitivity has come a long way since then.
That's true. So the film wasn't perfect.
No film is.
But it still got people talking about these important issues.
Environmentalism, indigenous rights.
Exactly. What about the visuals? We talked about the amazing cinematography, but did Boorman use any, specific techniques to get his message across?
He did. One thing that stands out is his use of long takes, where the camera just lingers on a scene, giving you time to really take it all in.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It's like you're immersed in the environment.
Right. It wasn't just about pretty pictures. It was about using the camera to tell a story, to create an experience.
And it worked. I felt like I was right there in the rainforest.
And it wasn't just the visuals. The sound design was incredible, too.
Oh, yeah.
Boorman used a lot of natural sounds, like the insects, the rustling leaves, the distant animal call.
So you felt like you were really there.
Exactly. It's a total sensory experience.
Amazing. It's like you're not just watching the film, you're feeling it, hearing it, almost smelling it.
That's the power of cinema, right? It can transport us to another world.
Speaking of transporting us, there's that one scene in the film that really stood out to me.
Which one?
The one where the tribe uses a hallucinogenic plant as part of their spiritual ritual.
Oh, yeah, that's a pretty intense scene.
It's pretty wild. And it made me think about how, like, indigenous practices are often portrayed in films.
It's a sensitive topic.
Yeah. It's interesting how the film shows the tribe using this plant to connect with the spirits of the forest.
To gain wisdom and understanding.
Exactly. Which is so different from how we usually see psychedelics portrayed in, like, Western media.
Right. It's usually all about getting high, losing control.
Emerald Forest challenges those ideas.
It shows that these substances can be used in a sacred context as tools for spiritual exploration and healing.
But it also raises the question, is it okay for a Western filmmaker to show these practices on screen?
That's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, you want to showcase the diversity of indigenous cultures.
But you don't want to exploit or misrepresent their traditions.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
It's a film that really makes you think about these things.
It's not just a simple adventure story. It challenges you to examine your own biases, your own relationship with the natural world.
And I think that's why Emerald Forest is still relevant today, all these years later.
The issues it addresses are more important than ever.
You know, it's funny, we've been talking about this film for a while now, and I haven't even asked you the most basic question.
What's that?
Did you like it?
Did I like Emerald Forest?
Yeah, I mean, did you enjoy watching it?
That's a good question. And it's one I've been thinking about a lot during our conversation.
Oh,
You see, enjoy might not be the right word.
how so?
It's not a film that's meant to just entertain.
Okay.
It challenges you. It provokes you. It makes you question your assumptions.
So it's not a feel-good movie.
Not exactly. But there's a certain beauty in that challenge, you
Yeah.
know.
It's like you're not just watching a movie, you're having an experience that stays with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It makes you feel things, think things you might not have considered before.
So it's less about pure enjoyment and more about that lingering impact.
Precisely. It makes you look at the world through a different lens.
Okay, so it's not your typical popcorn flick. It's a film that demands your attention, your thought, maybe even a bit of soul-searching afterward.
I'd say so, and that complexity, that refusal to shy away from difficult questions is what makes it so compelling. It sparks conversations, debates even, long after you've seen it.
I bet. And speaking of sparking conversations, let's talk about the film's message. We know it's about the environment, about indigenous cultures, but is there like a single takeaway, a central message that Borman was trying to convey?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Can we boil this film down to a single soundbite? It's tempting to try, but I think Emerald Forest resists easy answers.
So it's not trying to preach a specific message.
No, it's more about asking questions, raising awareness, letting the viewer wrestle with the issues.
So it's more about showing us different perspectives, different ways of relating to the world, and letting us draw our own conclusions.
Precisely. Borman isn't telling us what to think. He's inviting us to think for ourselves.
Okay, so it's like he's saying, hey, here's a glimpse into another world, another way of life. What do you make of it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own society, our own values, you know?
And the reflection might not always be flattering.
Not always, no. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the choices we make and the impact we have on the planet and other cultures.
Right.
So it's a film that stays with you. You watch it, you think about it, you maybe even argue about it with your friends, but it definitely doesn't leave you indifferent.
That's the mark of a great film, isn't it? The ability to spark dialogue, to challenge our perspectives, to stay with us long after the credits roll.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here, having this deep dive decades after the film was released. Emerald Forest still matters, because the issues it brings up are just as relevant today as they were back in 1985.
Perhaps even more so. The Amazon rainforest is still under threat, indigenous communities around the world are still fighting for their rights, and the climate crisis is a stark reminder of our interconnectedness with the natural world.
It's like Emerald Forest was a warning, almost a prophecy. It gave us a glimpse into a future we might be heading towards.
It's a sobering thought, but an important one. And maybe, just maybe, Emerald Forest can serve as a reminder of what we stand to lose and what we can gain by listening to those who have lived in harmony with the earth for centuries.
It's a message of hope amidst the darkness, you know? A reminder that we have choices to make and that those choices matter.
Exactly. And with that in mind, I think it's time for us to shift gears a bit. We've been analyzing the film's themes and techniques, the historical context. But what about the emotional impact? How does this film make you feel?
That's a great question. We've been digging into the themes, the techniques, the history, But yeah, at the end of the day, it's how a film makes you feel that really matters. What about you? What emotions did Emerald Forest stir up for you?
Oh man, it was like a whole mix of things. First, there's that feeling of awe, just from the sheer beauty of the rainforest. Borman captured it so well.
Yeah, I felt that too.
But then there's this discomfort, seeing how these destructive forces are encroaching on this pristine environment.
Definitely. And there's also a sadness there, right? Knowing that this way of life, this connection to nature is under threat, not just in the Amazon, but all over the world.
Absolutely. The film doesn't sugarcoat the struggles that indigenous communities face, the loss of their land, their culture. It makes you think about the human cost of so-called progress.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. But even with all that, there's still a glimmer of hope in the film, right? I mean, look at Tommy, the engineer's son. He adapts to life with the tribe, embraces their values, their connection to nature. It's like he finds a sense of belonging that he was missing in the modern world.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Tommy's journey is like an awakening. It shows that there are other ways to live, other ways to measure success beyond just material wealth and technology.
It's a reminder that sometimes progress means going back to simpler ways of being.
Back to the wisdom of those who have always lived in harmony with nature.
Exactly. And it's not just about learning from indigenous cultures. It's about respecting their rights, protecting their land, making sure their voices are heard.
Right. Emerald Forest is a call to action. It's a reminder that we need to be stewards of the planet, that we need to protect nature for everyone, for future generations.
It's a message that's more relevant now than ever before.
Absolutely. With the climate crisis and everything else going on,
Emerald Forest was like a warning.
a prophecy almost.
Yeah, it showed us what we stand to lose if we don't change our ways.
But it also showed us what we could gain if we learned to live in balance with the earth.
So what do you think? Would a film like Emerald Forest get made today?
That's a good question. Things are so different now. We're bombarded with content. Everyone's attention span is shorter.
It's hard to imagine a film with such a slow pace, such a contemplative mood, finding a wide audience today.
Maybe we're all too distracted, too used to instant gratification to really appreciate a film that asks us to slow down and think.
Maybe. But on the other hand, there's more awareness now about environmental issues, more interest in indigenous cultures.
That's true. Maybe there's room for a new kind of environmental film.
Something that blends art and activism, entertainment and education.
Exactly. A film that reaches a wider audience, sparks conversations, inspires real change.
A film that reminds us that we're all connected to each other and to the natural world. That would be something special.
It would be. And who knows, maybe someone listening to this deep dive will be inspired to make that film, to tell a story that captures the urgency of our times, a story that leaves people feeling both challenged and hopeful.
That's what we need. So to all the filmmakers out there, we're calling on you. Tell us a story that matters, a story that moves us, a story that helps us envision a better future.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Emerald Forest. We hope you learned something new, that you're thinking about things in a new way, and that you're feeling a little more connected to the world around you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.